It started the way quiet things usually did, unnoticed. The human heard soft footsteps, crunching the dirt road behind him, as he walked back from the market. When he turned, a small alien kid froze, wide-eyed, clutching a pendant that glimmered faintly in the fading light. "Lost, huh?" the human muttered. The kid said nothing, only trailed him all the way to the farmhouse. His old sheepdog barked once, then wagged her tail, and let the child collapse against her side. Within an hour, the two were rolling in the grass like lifelong companions. By nightfall, the child sat at his kitchen table, chewing clumsily at bread while the dog slept at their feet. The human figured he'd take the kid back to the settlement in the morning. He didn't know the pendant was a royal crest. He didn't know ships were already burning through the sky. And he didn't know that before the week was over, an empire would kneel at his doorstep. His name was Daniel Bray. 52, stocky, always wearing his boots even indoors, and quiet in the way of men who'd lived too long alone. He didn't go into town much. Once a week, maybe twice, to sell eggs or pick up canned goods he couldn't grow himself. The people in the settlement barely noticed him anymore, and that was just fine. But the kid, that was something else. They didn't talk. Not once, not even when he offered them a seat, or soup, or a warmer blanket. They just nodded when prompted, and moved with an odd grace that didn't match their size. Too thin. Skin pale and smooth like quartz, eyes too large. They looked no older than 6 or 7, but something in the way they watched the world was older than that. Daniel didn't push. He'd raised animals and plants long enough to know when something needed time. He set a spot on the couch with extra pillows, but the kid fell asleep next to the dog instead, curled against her thick fur, clutching that pendant. In the firelight, Daniel noticed it again. A disk of silver, etched with spirals, and something that looked like script, faintly glowing. Not a toy. He made a mental note to check in town tomorrow. Maybe someone was looking for them. Maybe it was a simple case of a lost child. But even as he told himself that, something deep in his gut said otherwise. The next morning, the kid followed him around the farm. Didn't speak. Didn't wander far. Just shadowed him while he fed the chickens, checked the irrigation lines, and replaced the solar rig's cracked casing. When the wind picked up, the child flinched. Every time a bird flew too close or a machine hissed, they hunched like they expected a blow. Daniel didn't comment. He just handed them an apple at lunch and let them sit in the sun with the dog. Later that afternoon, he drove them into the settlement. No one recognized the kid. Not the grocer, not the postmaster, not even old Jacob, who bragged about knowing every birth and marriage from here to Tarkin Ridge. But a woman near the fabric stall narrowed her eyes and whispered, "That marking, isn't that a royal crest?" Daniel blinked. "What?" She gestured to the pendant. "On the news a few months back. Some treaty celebration. That shape in the center, it's on the royal sigil." Daniel looked at the kid. They were staring at a rack of colorful scarves, fingers twitching like they wanted to touch but didn't dare. He shook his head. "Probably just looks similar." "Maybe," the woman said, unconvinced. That night Daniel sat at the table, sifting through a box of old medical supplies. The kid had flinched again when he'd started the generator, not just startled, but terrified. Hypervigilance. Possibly trauma. Malnourished, too. He'd noticed the way their limbs moved, slow, like someone whose body was running on fumes. He ran a portable scanner, basic stuff. Human vitals came up blank, as expected, but their oxygen saturation was borderline low. Core temp was a little higher than normal. Probably baseline for their species, whatever that was. He checked the blanket situation, made sure they were warm, and decided to take a blood sample in the morning, nothing invasive, just enough to test hydration and nutrient levels. They needed more than soup and bread if he was going to keep them steady. The child slept curled against the dog again, breathing shallow but calm. Daniel sat nearby, watching the fire crackle, wondering what kind of life had left a kid so silent, so watchful, so wary of everything except an old mutt with stiff joints. By the third day, the whispers in town had turned to rumors. Daniel overheard them while picking up more fuel cells. "Looks like one of them off-worlder kids, too clean for a street brat. I heard the pendant's bonded, royal tech. If it is, there'll be ships soon, you'll see." He left with his supplies, and said nothing. He didn't care what they thought. The kid wasn't hurting anyone. They were eating more now, sleeping better. Still didn't talk, but they smiled once, just a twitch of the mouth, when the dog nudged them into a mud puddle. Daniel figured that was progress. He gave them a name, too. Said it out loud one morning as they sat on the porch with a bowl of porridge. "Bug," he said. "You're quiet, you follow me everywhere, and I'm pretty sure you'd climb the walls if I let you. So, Bug." They tilted their head, blinked, then nodded once. That was that. The first sign came on the 5th night. A low hum in the air. Not a sound exactly, a pressure, like the world was inhaling. Daniel stepped outside and scanned the horizon. Nothing, not yet. But the dog whined and moved closer to the kid. The next morning, he noticed something odd with the pendant. The glyphs had changed, slightly, like they'd rotated or reconfigured. Bug didn't react, but their eyes flicked to the sky more than once during the day. Daniel worked faster than usual. Harvested the last of the late vegetables, moved the backup battery into the cellar, installed a second layer of insulation on the windows. He wasn't sure why. Just a gut feeling. Bug watched him the whole time. Not fearful, just ready. The sky split open at dusk. The sun had barely dipped below the ridge when the clouds caught fire. A dozen ships descended, massive and silent, their undercarriages glowing orange with atmospheric re-entry. Crests pulsed across their hulls, stylized stars wrapped in rings of flame. Royal. The dog barked once, then backed up, teeth bared. Bug froze. Daniel stepped onto the porch. He didn't grab a weapon. Didn't move Bug inside. He just stood there. The fields filled with soldiers, rows of them, armored and faceless, fanning out like a tide across the golden wheat. Villagers scattered, screams echoing in the distance. But none of the troops moved past the edge of Daniel's farm. One broke from the formation. Taller. A commander, probably. He stepped forward, voice amplified and flat. "The heir is here, return them." Daniel felt Bug press into his side. He didn't move. Didn't blink. Didn't speak. Yet, that night, as the wind picked up and the glow of the fleet bathed the farm in flickering gold, Daniel stood firm. The dog growled, low and constant. Bug trembled, one hand clutching his jacket. And still, Daniel didn't move. The soldiers advanced to the base of the porch steps. Weapons drawn. Waiting. Watching. He could feel the moment tightening like a wire. And soon, someone or something would snap it. The commander lifted his arm. One sharp signal. Weapons rose. Lines of soldiers stepped forward, uniform boots rustling the tall wheat like a tide dragging toward shore. Their formation was precise, merciless. Not a word spoken, not a visor lifted. The hum of descending ships grew louder, deepening the air itself. Dust swirled. The wind began to carry that hot metal scent of atmospheric engines. Somewhere overhead, one of the fleet's lower craft adjusted its position, casting the house in a flickering red glow. Bug clung tighter to Daniel's side. The sheepdog didn't bark again, just stood between the child and the steps, stiff-legged and snarling. And Daniel, still and silent, watched the soldiers close in. His pulse thudded in his neck, his hands curled slowly into fists. His boots were planted in the wood like roots. He didn't know what they'd do if he refused. He didn't know how far they'd go. But when the lead soldier's foot touched the first stair, Daniel spoke. Not a shout. Not a plea. Just calm, steady, firm. "You'll not frighten them here." The wind seemed to pause. So did the soldiers. Even the engines above dimmed slightly, as if the air itself was listening. One step. One sentence. The commander didn't move. The entire front line halted mid-step, mid-breath, frozen. Whispers buzzed across their comms, barely audible to Daniel, like static stirred by a sudden storm of doubt. Bug blinked up at him. Their hand loosened slightly on his sleeve. The sheepdog stopped growling. Daniel didn't move. He kept his voice level, quiet enough to be personal, but loud enough to be heard. "You think uniforms and fleets can shake a kid who sleeps beside my dog every night?" No reply. And you think I'd let you take them because you show up with fire in the sky? Still, nothing. He took one more step forward, off the porch, into the grain. You'll not take them like this. The soldiers looked to their commander. The commander stared at Daniel for 3 long seconds. Then, lowered his arm. Weapons dropped. The formation didn't retreat, not yet, but they stopped advancing. The electric air of the battlefield sagged, uncertain. And then came the rumble. Not from the clouds, not from the engines above, but from the eastern horizon. Trees bowed under the downwash of something massive. Soil shivered under the first shockwave. The sky lit anew with cold silver, and a ship the size of a mountain broke through the clouds. Unlike the others, this one was black. Matte hull. No crest, no insignia. Only one signal blinked from its underbelly, a single ring of violet light, rotating once every 5 seconds. Bug let out a soft breath. The commander stiffened. Visibly. Behind the rows of soldiers, ranks parted. The flagship landed with no blast, no roar, just a pressure that sank into Daniel's bones. The wheat flattened for 200 yards in every direction. A ramp extended. And from the darkness within stepped the queen. She didn't need guards. She didn't need banners. She walked in silence, alone, her robes trailing behind like smoke. Her crown was made of braided metals that shimmered only when she passed near movement. Her eyes were unadorned. Her face was unreadable. The soldiers parted. Daniel didn't move. Bug stood behind him, motionless. The pendant around their neck blinked softly, now slower than ever, dimmer, like it had recognized something. The queen stopped 5 paces from the porch. Her eyes weren't on Bug. They were on Daniel. He opened his mouth to speak, then stopped. So did she. A long moment passed. Then she spoke. When the child vanished, she said, my court fractured. War nearly resumed. Sectors threatened to split. We feared abduction. We feared betrayal. She gestured, lightly, to the fields. Instead, I find this. Daniel didn't reply. The queen stepped once more, eyes narrowing not in anger, but in examination. You did not surrender when our ships came. He nodded. They were scared. Her voice lowered. You were outnumbered. I knew that too. She looked to the sheepdog, who had not moved an inch, tail rigid, eyes locked on her with the loyalty of a guardian ancient and real. Finally, the queen looked to Bug. They followed something, she said. We tracked the pendant to this region, but the decision, the direction was not guided. The child chose. Bug didn't answer. You gave them safety, the queen said. But more than that, you gave them stillness. Daniel glanced down. Bug was shaking again, though not from cold. Their face was tight with something like confusion. Like waiting for the moment everything was going to be pulled away again. He set a hand on their shoulder. They're not going with you, he said. A whisper spread through the soldiers, audible even beneath the soft thrum of hovering ships. The queen didn't flinch. She only tilted her head. And if I said that the future of 10 systems depends on their return? Daniel nodded once. Then you need a better future. Another wave of whispers. This one harder to ignore. The commander took half a step forward, uncertain. The queen raised one finger. He stopped. Then she looked at Daniel again. Would you raise a child, not of your species, not of your world, one hunted by those who claim to protect them? I already am. What makes you think you are capable? Daniel looked down at Bug, then back at her. Because I was kind, before I knew who they were. Silence. Even the wind dared not speak. The queen stood for a long time, her expression unreadable. Then finally, she exhaled. She raised her hand again, slowly. And the soldiers turned. The formation broke. Weapons holstered. The commander glanced back once. Then followed. The queen turned to leave. But just before reaching the ramp, she looked back one last time. They are safe, she said. With you. Then she was gone. The fleet lifted off like dandelion seeds in a breeze. And Daniel Bray stood in his field, his hand on a trembling child's shoulder, watching stars swallow warships without a single shot fired. The quiet that followed wasn't normal. It was too complete. No insects, no wind, not even the creak of the porch. The wheat, trampled and flattened, lay still as if afraid to rustle. Daniel didn't move for a long time after the ships vanished. Bug clung to his coat, shoulders tense. The dog finally relaxed first, lowering her head and sitting beside the child with a soft whine. Daniel exhaled. "You all right?" he asked, gently. Bug didn't speak, but their fingers found his hand and held on. That was answer enough. The aftermath wasn't loud either. No one in town came to check on him, but they didn't have to. Word spread anyway. By the next morning, supplies appeared in quiet drops at the edge of his fence. Fuel canisters, seed packets, a wrapped parcel with children's clothes folded neatly inside. A single note written in sharp, blocky script. If a voice can stop a warship, it ought to be warm in winter. Daniel pinned that one above the fireplace. Bug still didn't talk much, but they started pointing at things. They'd tap the water tap twice to signal they were thirsty, pat their chest once for hungry, press 2 fingers to Daniel's elbow if they wanted him to sit with them by the fire. It wasn't much, but it was growing. Daniel didn't press. They'd speak when they were ready. They were no longer flinching at shadows. The dog started sleeping deeper again. That's when Daniel let himself breathe too. He began tracking Bug's health more deliberately. Each evening, he ran the scanner quietly, compared body temperature against the baselines he'd stored, monitored hydration, organ rhythms, energy absorption. The readings improved slowly but steadily, weight gain within acceptable range, no further signs of systemic distress, and the strange violet pigment in their blood had stabilized. He still didn't know what half of it meant biologically, but the numbers were consistent. Their system didn't rely on food alone. Daniel had figured that out after a week. Part of their energy came from ambient radiation, starlight, most likely. Not harmful to them, but essential. That's why the pendant never came off. It regulated absorption when the sky failed. And it explained their weakness in the early days. Overcast skies, long nights, they weren't just inconvenient, they were dangerous. He reinforced the skylight above the couch and added a programmable UV system, just in case. 3 weeks passed without incident. Bug was beginning to smile. Daniel caught it one morning, when the dog rolled into the compost heap chasing a butterfly. Bug clapped once and laughed, a short, high sound, barely more than a hiccup. Daniel didn't mention it, just handed them another slice of toast. That evening, they tugged his sleeve gently and pointed at themselves. "Bug," they said. Clear, soft, deliberate. Daniel nodded. "Bug," he repeated. "That's you." They smiled again. Then they pointed to the dog. "Maggie," Daniel said. Bug nodded, serious. They were building their world again, piece by piece. It wasn't until the snow came that Daniel realized how permanent things were becoming. He found himself laying out a winter wardrobe for Bug from supplies the villagers had left. Boots, wool socks, scarves, gloves. He installed heavier insulation in the windows. Brought the dog's bed closer to the hearth. Built a second bed. A small one, just the right size. Bug didn't need to ask. They knew it was theirs. That night, Daniel added another log to the fire and paused in the hallway, watching them sleep. Maggie's tail twitched. Bug's pendant glowed softly, not in warning, just steady, like a nightlight for something ancient and young at once. Then the letter came. Not by courier. It appeared in the barn, tucked under a sack of grain. Heavy paper, real ink, sealed with wax that shimmered with stardust. He opened it by lamplight. To Regent Bray. You are now marked by more than honor. The court acknowledges your defiance not as insult, but as instruction. In future, we will listen before we send fleets. The child is safe. We will not return. Q. Daniel stared at it for a long time. Then folded it neatly and burned it in the stove. Bug didn't need to know. They already had enough weight on their shoulders. Later that week, Daniel took Bug into town with him. It was their first time back since the arrival. People stared, but not with hostility. A few nodded. One woman handed Bug a knitted hat without a word. The baker gave them a biscuit for free. Maggie got one too. Bug didn't speak in public, but they didn't hide either. Daniel watched them as they watched the world. Less afraid now, more curious. They were still young, still healing. But they were rooted. And roots had a way of holding fast. That night, as snow tapped against the windows and the dog snored lightly by the fire, Bug sat beside Daniel at the table. They pushed a drawing across to him. Crayon lines, awkward shapes, him, the dog, the house, stars, and one little figure in the middle, with a glowing necklace and a smile. Bug pointed at it, then pointed at themselves. Daniel nodded once, his throat tight. "Yeah," he said, "that's you." Then Bug pointed at the tallest figure. "Him." They touched the paper, then pointed to their own chest. Then touched Daniel's. Their meaning was clear. Home wasn't where they were from. It was where someone stood still when the whole sky wanted to pull them away. Winter held the land longer than usual that year. Frost glazed the windows until midday. The fields slept beneath thick snow. Even the ever-noisy generator hummed more softly, as if respecting the hush that had settled over everything. Daniel didn't mind the quiet. He'd learned to listen inside it. Bug was growing fast now. Their limbs filled out with strength instead of fragility. Their steps grew more confident, and their eyes, once darting and guarded, now lingered. They watched the world with curiosity rather than caution. The pendant still pulsed gently at their chest, but no longer as a warning, more like a memory, a distant heartbeat. Most nights, Daniel would find them at the window just after sundown, watching the stars, not fearful, just thoughtful, as if trying to recognize a face in the sky. They weren't sure they wanted to meet again. Maggie would rest beside them, her graying fur pressed to Bug's legs, both of them wrapped in a blanket that still smelled faintly of wood smoke and sheep. Daniel would pour a cup of tea, settle into his chair, and wait for Bug to come sit with him. Every night, they did. The village changed too. No one ever said the word heir again, not out loud. But there were subtle shifts. School sent out a notice saying Bug was welcome to enroll in the spring. A carpenter from town dropped off a set of carved story blocks, alien glyphs on one side, English on the other. The town council invited Daniel to one of their open meetings for the first time in years. He didn't go. But he kept the letter. No one ever tried to take Bug again. Sometimes, that fact itself startled Daniel more than anything else. One afternoon, in early thaw, Bug caught a cold. It wasn't serious, just a low-grade fever, mild cough, fatigue. Still, Daniel monitored it obsessively. He tracked symptoms, adjusted food intake, increased the room's humidity, and checked vitals every 6 hours. Bug tolerated it with patient exasperation. They took their medicine, drank warm soup, and only once rolled their eyes when he fluffed their pillows for the 3rd time in an hour. "You're the one who glows when sick," he said. They stuck their tongue out and smiled weakly. Recovery took 6 days. By the 7th, they were back outside, building a snow figure shaped vaguely like Maggie. The dog watched from the porch, unimpressed but tolerant. Daniel watched from the window, and finally let himself laugh. It was the kind of laugh that comes from the middle of the chest, where the old fears had lived. Those fears were quieter now. Not gone, but quiet. In the spring, Bug began to write. It started with lists, things they liked, things they wanted to know, things Daniel said that confused them. Then came stories, drawings, journal entries. Daniel never asked to read them, but one day Bug left a page on his nightstand. At the top, they had written, "Why did you say it?" Below it, a child's drawing of the standoff, the porch, the fleet, the queen's robes, trailing like fire. And Daniel, standing still. He looked at the page for a long time, then turned it over and wrote his answer. Because they needed to hear someone say no. Bug never asked again. But they left the page on the mantel. Framed it weeks later. Time passed the way it does when it isn't being counted. Spring bled into summer. Bug helped rebuild part of the fence, learned to drive the tractor in a straight line, and developed a fascination with fermented cabbage that Daniel never truly understood. The pendant lost its glow completely one evening. Bug didn't say anything about it, just took it off, folded it in a piece of cloth, and placed it in a small box near their bed. Daniel watched, but didn't comment. It felt like a door had closed. And no one needed to lock it. Then, without warning, the Queen returned. No ships. No soldiers. Just her alone, wearing a long coat instead of royal robes, walking down the road like any other visitor. Maggie barked once, then settled. Bug stepped outside, not afraid, not excited, just still. Daniel followed, drying his hands on a towel. The Queen stopped at the edge of the porch. They didn't exchange greetings. "I am not here for the heir," she said. "I am here for you." Daniel folded his arms. "You've said enough already." She nodded. "I know." She paused. Then said, "Our laws are changing, slowly, but they are." He didn't reply. "You showed us something no policy ever could. That shelter doesn't require knowledge or training, just willingness." "Why?" "I didn't shelter them for your court," Daniel said. "I did it because they were cold." The Queen smiled faintly. "Precisely." She turned to Bug. "They are not bound to return. Not now, not ever." Bug stepped forward. "I know." The Queen studied them. "You are becoming." Bug tilted their head. "I already am." Then, to Daniel, she said, "You changed something that wasn't supposed to change." He shrugged. "Good." The Queen gave a slight bow. Not deep. Not ceremonial. Just real. Then she turned and walked away down the road until the trees swallowed her from view. The summer was long and gentle. Maggie passed quietly under the tree line, curled in her usual spot, wrapped in a favorite blanket. Bug buried her with quiet dignity, tears falling but steady hands. They planted wildflowers above the grave. They never said goodbye, just, "Thank you." Daniel added her name to a small wooden marker beside the field. Then they planted a new tree beside it, just a sapling, but it took root fast. Bug visited it every morning for weeks. Then only on Sundays. Then only sometimes. Not because they forgot, but because the memory had settled into them. Years passed. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just honestly. Bug grew into something Daniel could never have predicted. They weren't just a survivor. They became a builder, a translator, a bridge. Sometimes, officials from far systems would visit, quietly, disguised, curious. They never asked to take Bug, only to learn. And always, before they left, they would ask Daniel just one thing. "What did you say that day?" And he would always answer, "I said, you'll not frighten them here." And for reasons no one fully understood, they would write it down. Every time. Word for word. As if it mattered more than protocols, or doctrines, or royal decrees. As if, in that moment, it had rewritten the law of the stars. And maybe, in a way, it had. Because a single sentence had stopped an empire. But it wasn't just the words. It was the man who said them. And the child who chose to stay.